Let's talk for a minute. So, this is honestly a question I really feel like I should have answered a long time ago. But someone asked this a few weeks ago, and I kind of kicked myself for not thinking of this sooner. What is feast? Now, I know for a lot of you, that question makes no sense. Of course you know what feast is. But for everyone who's joined since March of 2020, that may actually be a good question. Interestingly enough, in 25 years in the SCA, I have only ever sat at head table once in my life. And in Onsteora, head table for a feast is traditionally the hosting nobles, any visiting royals, and your champions from the previous year, or your current champions. And I wasn't even the champion. I was consort to my wife, who was the castellan, the overall champion for the barony of Northkeep. And this was just a couple weeks ago. Now, what's interesting about this feast that I want to call out here is I live in what is now the Principality of Windheim. And we are just 2 weeks, a couple weeks now, maybe more, away from our second coronet tournament. So the Principality's been in existence for almost half a year. And we just had our first feast in the Principality. Which, even though the lockdown has been over for a while now, that gives you an idea of how much the pandemic has knocked us back and how much it shifted our priorities. And in all of that, there are a lot of people who had never been to a feast and don't know what a feast is. So I'm going to do a couple things here for you. First of all, we're going to talk about feasts. What are they? Where do they come from? Why do we call them feasts? We're going to talk about feast gear, and then I'm going to show you mine and my wife's feast gear set, which I'm doing this to give you an idea of what a experienced high-level player's feast gear might look like. This is not a you need to start here, so please don't take it that way. But first things first. So we know from the people who were at the first ever SCA event that part of the festivities at the event was, at the end of the day, they had a large meal that was served to all the attendees. It was cooked out of someone's kitchen, and everyone sat down at tables or places, and the food was brought out to them, and they were served drinks while they were there. And that really is the template that the SCA has stuck to in one form or another in the 50 some odd years since then. A feast is generally, now I'm speaking as a lifelong Onsteoran. Your kingdom may approach this differently, but this should be close enough that you at least have a frame of reference to ask questions about. Most groups have at least one event a year. The larger groups, particularly the baronies, tend to have 2 events a year. Now, it's been my experience that their main event, usually the one where they pick their champions at, or most of their champions, will have a feast associated with that event. Their other event, their secondary event, which may or may not have championships at it, tends to not have a feast, though there are some that do have feast. There are also examples of events that have no feast, of groups that don't ever do feast at their events. So there are exceptions, but I'm giving you the average, the general rule of thumb. Now, what is a feast? So, a feast is a full meal that is provided to the attendees. Feasts generally are an extra charge when you are checking in at gate or when you are pre-registering now. You will usually be offered or asked if you want to purchase a feast above and beyond the purchase of your registration costs. And those are separate budget items. The site registration pays for the site and any amenities and so forth needed for the event. And the feast charge goes into the budget to buy the food. When you purchase a feast, you will either at place of purchase or when you arrive on site, if it's purchased online, generally be given a receipt in the form of a feast token. It's the same general concept as the site token. It's your receipt of purchase, but it's usually some interesting trinket or whatnot that you can hang on to. One of the more popular trends right now is some groups will actually print out little scrolls and roll them up, and on that scroll is the whole menu, and usually with important dietary information in case you have health considerations. I've actually seen that a lot, and I happen to think it's a really good idea. But once you receive the site token, usually later on in the day after the major activities have taken place, there'll be an announcement that's the feast hall or setup for feast is open for you to set up. And that's where you get your feast gear and you go there and you pick a spot on the table, or your party will claim a table, and you lay out your feast gear and your tablecloth if you have one, and you get ready. You bring your own gear. Now, what is feast gear? Those are your bowls, your plates, silverware, cups, that kind of thing. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then usually they'll tell you set up and get out, because they don't want people hanging out there milling about while the servers are getting ready to set up and start doing their thing. But then there'll be an announcement, feast is imminent, and everyone will come in and sit down. And for some groups I've been to, there'll be kind of a big procession in where the hosting nobles will come in to some fanfare, and they'll sit down at head table. Then everyone sits, and then the servers will come out and they will serve the courses. Now, in the SCA, at least in my kingdom, each course is called a remove. And I honestly don't know the linguistics behind that. I don't know where the word comes from. I suspect French, but I don't know. Most feasts that I have attended have at the minimum of 3 removes. Some sort of snack, some sort of main course, and then a dessert remove. I have been to feasts which were much larger. I was at a feast with 9 removes. And yes, they almost had to wheel me out of there with a wheelbarrow after that dessert course came out. Drinks, traditionally, from what I've seen, have been your choices of water, tea, and lemonade. Now keep in mind, because this is an SCA paid for activity, the SCA and the official organizers of the event cannot serve alcohol. I have, however, seen people set up alcohol to the side in parallel with all this as their own private venture, and say, if you would like some mead or some wine or some ale, bring a cup over here and I'll pour you some. So it's not that alcohol is not allowed. And matter of fact, I know plenty of groups where they encourage you to bring a good wine or a mead or something to chase the meal down with, but it simply cannot be provided by the local group in any official capacity. Now, is that the way it's always done? No, it's not. There are a number of feasts I've attended that are potluck. Pretty much everyone brings something. It all gets laid out across the table, and then you take turns going through the buffet line, effectively just kind of grabbing whatever you want and putting it on your plate. I've seen some that are really interesting hybrid where the hosting group will provide the main course, like so many pounds of chicken or so many pounds of beef or whatever, and everyone else brings starch and vegetables and desserts and that kind of thing. I've seen some groups that will buy the dessert and all the drinks and the expected potluck for main meal. All of this, all of the nuance and the detail should be announced with the event information in advance of the event. Like if you pull up an event right now you want to go to, you can go to the event ad and it will say feast provided, or feast is potluck, or what the feast is. Or if there's not there, if it didn't make the advertisement or it's not talked about, you could email the event autocrat or steward, or you could email the seneschal or nobility of the hosting group and say, is there a feast? I'm curious. Are feast for sale? Can I purchase a feast? Those are perfectly valid questions. They're asked all the time, and if you don't know, you're welcome to ask and get those answers. And then, of course, now there's the flip side of this. When you're done with feast, you usually are expected to pack up your own feast gear, the now dirty plates and bowls and silverware and cup. You're responsible for getting those packed up somehow and back to your car and take them back to your place and have them cleaned out. So just keep that in mind. That's part of the logistics. Now, feast gear. What is feast gear? Feast gear, at least in my kingdom, I don't know if this lingo is common in all kingdoms, but feast gear in my kingdom is the term we use for kind of your universal kit for whatever you need to eat a meal at an SCA event. Now, that's not saying the food. This is all of the implements that go into eating a feast, all your flatware and so forth. Now, what would I recommend you have for your first feast gear set? All right, item 1. Get a mug. If I had to pick something to be your first splurge, find a merchant at an event who sells mugs and get something nice. This one, now I didn't pay for this one, I didn't buy this one, got it another way. But something like this, depending on who the merchant is and what the rates are, 20 or 30 bucks might be on the high side. I can't imagine this being much more than that, at least at the time of making this video, by the way. Because the mug is something that you're going to need at almost any feast. Very, very few times do I. Actually, you're going to need it at feast, and if you're just walking around an event, it's a good thing to have a mug. They don't have to be ceramic. You can get a wood mug. You can get a wood chalice style like this. You can get a straight-sided mug with a handle, a big beer stein style. You can get whatever you want, as long as it looks quasi-medieval. Again, as I've said before, you don't want to distract from the medieval ambiance that we're trying to generate. So, a mug, drinking vessel of some sort. And something you can sit down. Viking horns are great. Just have something to sit them down with, because holding them is really just a pain in the neck if you're trying to eat a meal. Now, next thing you're going to need, a plate. Now, you'll see the plates I use in a minute. But really, you can go to any big box store and get a large dinner plate. You can even get a decorative one individually for a couple bucks. It's not hard, and they look fine. I mean, will they look plain compared to some of the fancier stuff out there? Yeah, but it's not like it's going to distract from anything going on around you. Go to some big box store, walk down the aisle, look at their plates. Some of them got some really nice decorative stuff. It looks great. Kind of poke around, see what you like. Look at pictures of what some of the upper crust plates and bowls and cups look like. Give yourself an idea. But a few bucks on a plate. You want a bowl? Same thing. Same price, really. You can go down that same aisle and probably find a matching bowl for a couple bucks. So, you're at $6 or $8, not a big deal. They make wooden plates and wooden bowls, by the way. You can buy them online, or you can go find a local merchant at your event, or maybe someone in your region who's willing to show you their wares, and you can purchase it online from them. I mean, shop around. Wood bowls, wood plates are an excellent option as well. Now, flatware. I really strongly encourage you will need a spoon. That's almost a given. You will need a knife of some sort. Now, it doesn't need to be a sharp-bladed knife. You don't need a steak knife out there. A butter knife will work just fine. That being said, if you want to spend a couple, you want to get a $20 or $30, hardened steel, some sort of 12th, 13th century personal knife that you can use at a dinner table, go for it. I mean, it's nothing wrong with that. I just don't want to set the bar very high for someone getting their first feast gear. And now, fork is kind of a funny thing. Forks are... spoons and knives we've got going back through centuries, but Forks, sometimes they existed, sometimes they didn't. Some cultures had them, some cultures didn't. When in doubt, just buy the damn thing. They're like 15 cents or 20 cents or 25 cents individually at the big box store. Just get a fork. Um, as your kit improves, as you get fancier stuff, if you want to, you can opt to not get a fork. That's fine on you. You know, it's whatever works for you. But um, if you talk to some of the more in-depth culinary researchers, you'll hear conversations about, well, they didn't use forks or they didn't have forks. The fork hadn't been invented yet. Those are all valid talking points. I'm not disputing any of that. I know for a fact there are several points in England where forks just weren't something you would have seen on the English dinner table. Don't let that stop you from getting a fork. There are some foods that, regardless of if they're historical, they're just easier on you to eat with a fork. So grab a fork. Um, if you want to go off the deep end, there's nothing wrong with grabbing a soup spoon and a teaspoon and a butter knife and a steak knife and a salad fork and a dinner fork. Okay, you're at maybe $8 versus 4 for flatware or whatever. You know, it's not a big deal. But the bare minimum, in my opinion, to really be functional with a feast gear set is a plate, a bowl, knife, fork, spoon, and some sort of drinking vessel. You know, so you can drink. It really is that simple. Something else to carry. I highly recommend you carry a towel. Just throw a hand towel on there so you have that to do a quick and dirty wipe down of your stuff when you're done, something to wipe your hands, and a napkin, something to put next to your feast gear while you're eating so you can wipe your fingers, wipe your lips. You know, if you spill something, you can wipe it off. You will want that there. And that really is the bare bones. What are you carrying all this in? Anything you can. I know people who pack these, they'll wrap each individual thing up in a towel, like they'll get a couple of kitchen towels and wrap the stuff up and it slides into a soft-sided bag, you know, like a messenger bag. They make a bag for it, or they'll buy a tote that's plain and looks okay and they'll slide the stuff in there. My wife and I had a basket for years. We just stacked our stuff in there, wrapped in towels so it wouldn't clang or break, and that worked fine. I mean, it really did. It was a great way to carry stuff around. Finally, the basket just gave out. The kit was heavy and the basket wasn't meant to take that type of weight, and it just gave up the ghost. Boxes are real common. That's what I use right now, and we'll show you that in a minute. But the box is a great way of storing and protecting your feast gear kit and a lot of stuff with it, because usually the box has extra room. So that really is, those are the basics. Now, what I'm going to do next is I want to show you my feast gear kit, and I want to show you